Chapter 1. The ritual begins. The hum of the raven's call echoed through the ship's corridors, a constant drone that matched the uneasy atmosphere aboard the vessel. Captain Declan Harper paced in the cockpit, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. The starship had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and the vast emptiness of space now stretched before them, silent, deadly, and cold. Outside the ship's viewport, the alien planet Vrath, 9 loomed like an unknown beast. Its glowing red skies and towering jagged mountains gave it an almost ominous presence. "Everything's on schedule, Captain," Lieutenant Airy reported from a navigation console. Her purple skin glowed faintly under the dim lighting, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the view of the planet. Her voice was calm, yet there was a nervous edge to it, a warning hidden in the quiet hum of the engines. "Good," Declan replied, but his mind was elsewhere. They weren't supposed to be here, not this far out in the Valkyrie space. The crew had come to deliver supplies, but now they were on the verge of something much more dangerous. A wrong turn, a miscalculation on trajectory, and they drifted too far into a Valkyrie territory. A mistake that could cost them all their lives. The ship's communication system buzzed, pulling Declan from his thoughts. The screen flickered to life, and a holographic image of the Valkyrie official appeared, tall, muscular, with dark, glowing eyes and a scarred face. He stood imposingly, his voice filled with authority. "You have entered our sacred space. Human, prepare for the trial of the worthy." Declan blinked. "What the hell is that?" The Valkyrie's lips curled into a cold, humorless smile. "A tradition. You have 2 options. Face the trial or leave. But understand this, human. If you leave, you'll be considered cowards. And cowards are not welcomed here." Before Declan could respond, the transmission cut out. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, as if the very ship was resonating with the tension that suddenly gripped the crew. "This wasn't part of the plan," Airy said, her voice tight. "Captain, the Valkyrie are brutal. They value strength above all else. If you engage in this trial, there's no turning back." Declan's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't his fight. He wasn't here to prove himself to anyone, least of all an alien species that thought so highly of themselves. But the alternative was to run, and running had never been his style. "We're not leaving," he said, determination in his voice. "Prepare for landing. We'll face this trial." The ship descended into the alien atmosphere, cutting through thick clouds of red dust. The planet's surface was a rugged desert, a place where nothing seemed to thrive except for the harsh winds and the echo of ancient battles fought in its rocky terrain. The ship touched down with a soft thud, its landing gear crunching into the dust below. As the airlock hissed open, Declan stepped out onto the alien soil. The ground beneath him was jagged, rough, like a battlefield that had seen centuries of war. Above him, the sun was a bleeding red orb, casting a surreal glow on everything. Before him stood a towering structure, made of dark stone, its sides covered in glowing runes that pulsed with an ancient energy. Figures in heavy armor stood at attention, their eyes glowing faintly, watching him with an air of disapproval. The Valkyrie warriors circled him, their movements smooth and predatory. Declan could feel the weight of their gaze, each one sizing him up, looking for weakness. "You will fight," one of them declared, his voice gravelly and deep. "Only by surviving will you earn the right to leave. Prove your worth. Show us why your kind is worthy of standing among us." Declan's pulse quickened. His fingers twitched, itching for the familiar weight of his weapon. But this wasn't a fight he could win with firepower alone. He had to prove something deeper than just survival. He squared his shoulders and met their eyes with steady resolve. "I'll show you. I'm human." The trial began. The air around him thickened, the scent of metal and blood hanging in the oppressive heat. The first Valkyrie lunged at him. But Declan was already moving, his muscles reacting faster than his brain could process. His hands gripped a nearby staff, the cool metal sliding through his fingers as he swung it with all the force he could muster. It collided with the Valkyrie's chest, sending him sprawling backward. For a moment there was silence. The warriors stared in disbelief, their eyes wide, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. Declan stood tall, breathing heavily. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. There was no way out of this now. And as the second Azalcari stepped forward, eager to exact revenge, Declan Harper prepared for the fight of his life. Chapter 2, A Strange Reward. The sharp scent of ozone lingered in the air, stinging Declan's nostrils as he stood in the heart of the Azalcari city. The neon lights of the towering spires above bathed the streets in an otherworldly glow, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the ancient stone. The sound of distant voices, speaking in a language that was as harsh as the city's skyline, reverberated through the air, mixing with the low hum of alien machinery. Declan's chest was still tight from the trial, his body aching from the physical toll of surviving the arena. But there was no time to rest. His victory, unexpected and now undeniable, had set something in motion. He had won. And with that victory, the Azalcari had made their decision clear. Step forward, human. The deep voice of Vilan, the Azalcari emissary, rang out as Declan was escorted to the grand entrance of the Azalcari citadel. The warrior's armor gleamed with strange symbols, and his eyes, glowing like molten amber, flicked toward Declan with an unreadable expression. At the heart of the citadel's hall, where the air was thick with the smell of incense and alien perfumes, the Varka waited, silent, statuesque, and radiating an aura of both defiance and acceptance. These women, warriors in their own right, had been the prize for many generations of the Azalcari's trials. Declan felt their eyes on him, their gazes intense, yet somehow empty, as though each woman held the weight of centuries of tradition and fate. "What is this?" Declan asked, his voice rough, a sharp contrast to the reverence in the hall. His eyes flitted between the women, each one different in her own way. There was Lyra, a woman whose dark skin shimmered like molten copper under the light, and Sora, whose eyes were like two moons in a starless sky, distant and unreadable. Vilan turned to him, his expression unreadable. "You, human, have proven your worth in the trial of the worthy. The reward is as old as our people. You are now entitled to claim one of these women, for she will be your partner in life. She will serve as your companion and share in your fate." Declan's stomach twisted. He had read enough about alien cultures to understand the significance of this offer, but it was one thing to know it intellectually, and another to face it head-on. He had never asked for this. He had never even wanted it. The idea of claiming a partner as a prize felt wrong. But to refuse was to dishonor not just the women before him, but the very core of Azalcari tradition. Declan's stomach twisted. He had read enough about alien cultures to understand the significance of this offer, but it was one thing to know it intellectually, and another to face it head-on. He had never asked for this. He had never even wanted it. The idea of claiming a partner as a prize felt wrong, but to refuse was to dishonor not just the women before him, but the very core of Azalcari tradition. "Is this how you treat your women?" he asked, his voice laced with disgust. His eyes locked on Vilan, but the alien's expression remained stone-faced. "Is this the only role they're allowed to play?" There was a flicker of tension in the air as Vilan's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You misunderstand. Human. The Varka are no mere prize. They are warriors, skilled and strong, as capable as any male Azalcari. But their role in our society is different. They serve in ways that no man can." Declan looked back at the women, his gaze lingering on Nira, the one who had caught his attention during the trial. Her eyes, bright with fire, met across the distance, her expression unreadable. There was a deep sadness in her gaze, but also a quiet strength that made Declan's heart tighten. "I don't want to choose," he muttered, running a hand through his short hair. "This is madness." "You must," Vilan intoned, his voice carrying the weight of the entire Azalcari culture. "The ritual demands it. The chosen one must pick companion. It is a bond forged in blood and steel. A human is not permitted to walk away from such a victory. Your claim is now set." Declan's frustration simmered beneath the surface. He turned toward Nira again, meeting her gaze more intensely this time. There was something there, a flicker of something that was more than just resignation. It was a challenge, a rebellion against a system that had kept her chained to the whims of the Azalcari's traditions. Nira took a step forward, her movements graceful, yet sharp like the edge of a blade. Her dark, shoulder-length hair swayed in the cool, artificial breeze of the citadel, and as she approached Declan, Her eyes never left his. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but firm. "Captain," she said, her words deliberate, "you think this is a choice. But it is not. You are trapped in the same cage we all are. The only difference is that you have the power to choose how you will live within it." Declan stared at her for a long moment, his heart pounding as he realized the weight of what she was saying. This wasn't just about winning a trial. This wasn't just about claiming a woman. It was about survival, and in a way, about a rebellion against an entire culture that had long oppressed these women. But even as he thought this, a wave of guilt washed over him. He had no right to free them, not in the way they deserved. His presence here had only complicated things further. Nira continued, her voice softer now. "If you truly want to help us, then understand this. Your victory here is not just a chance to take a woman. It's a chance to change everything. But it will come at a cost." A sudden, sharp hum filled the room, the sound of the Citadel's energy shields powering up. Declan's eyes flicked to the ceiling, and Vilan's smile widened, an unsettling glint in his eyes. "Do not mistake our tradition for weakness, human," Vilan warned. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. The Varka may have been claimed, but their loyalty will be earned, not taken." With those words, Declan's stomach churned. He didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain. His involvement in this alien world was only just beginning, and the choices he made now would shape everything to come. With a heavy heart, Declan turned back to Nira, his decision hanging in the air, unspoken but undeniable. He had to choose, and the weight of that choice would change both their lives forever. Chapter 3. The tension grows. The metallic scent of Citadel hung in the air, mingling with the strange, floral fragrance that seemed to pulse from the walls themselves. Declan had become accustomed to the otherworldly atmosphere over the past few days, but the weight of his decision still pressed heavily on his shoulders. His victory in the trial of the worthy had brought him closer to the heart of a Valkyrie society, but it also plunged him into a web of tension and uncertainty. He had chosen Nira, not out of obligation, but because there was something in her, something more than just her defiance, that resonated with him. He had seen in the way she fought in the arena, in the quiet strength behind her eyes, and in the unspoken bond that formed between them. But now, as they walked side by side to the towering spires of the Valkyrie city, the weight of what that choice meant was becoming clearer. The Varka women, once prisoners in their own right, now walked freely by his side. But freedom came with its own set of rules here, rules that Declan had yet to fully understand. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the city's jagged stone streets. Above them, the glowing symbols carved into the stone walls of the citadel flickered, their light pulsing in time with the hum of the city's heart. Alien voices echoed from hidden corners, speaking in a language Declan could barely comprehend. The sound was harsh, like jagged rocks scraping against one another, but there was an underlying rhythm to it, a cadence that hinted at the deep cultural roots of this place. Nira walked just a few steps ahead of him, her back straight and her head held high. Her eyes were locked on the path ahead, her expression unreadable. She had not spoken much since the trial, but Declan could feel the tension between them. She was a woman of pride, and now that he had claimed her as his partner, he sensed that she resented the very thing that had brought them together. Her independence was something she had never relinquished, not even for the Valkyrie, who saw her as little more than a prize to be claimed. "You've been quiet," Declan said, trying to break the silence. His voice fell out of place in the stillness that had settled between them. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Nira's steps faltered for a brief moment, but she didn't turn to face him. Instead, she spoke with her back to him, her words barely above a whisper. "I'm not your property, human," she said, her voice laced with the quiet fury that he'd come to expect. "I never was. You may have won me in your trial, but that doesn't mean I owe you anything. You think you've come here to save us, but you haven't the slightest idea of what you're dealing with." Declan's chest tightened at her words, but he swallowed the anger that threatened to rise. He had expected resistance, but the rawness of her resentment still stung. He could feel the cultural divide stretching out between them, her fierce pride, her hatred of the Valkyrie traditions, and his own growing awareness of just how deep the rift between them really was. The weight of her challenge hit him like a punch to the gut. But instead of recoiling, Declan felt something stir within him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was the same feeling he'd had when he first entered the arena, when he stood against the odds and fought for survival. But now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about something more, something deeper. "I will," he said, his voice firm. "I'll prove it, Nira. I'll prove that I'm worth your trust." And as the neon lights flickered around them, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch on forever, Declan Harper knew that the journey ahead would be one of unimaginable challenge. But it was a challenge he was willing to face, not just for himself, but for Nira, and for the women like her who had been trapped in a world they never chose. With a final shared glance, they continued walking to the heart of the Azalkari city, knowing that the path ahead was uncertain, but that together they might just find a way to change everything. Chapter 4, The Betrayal. The winds on Vrath. 9 were harsh, carrying the scent of sulfur and metal across the barren landscape as Declan stood atop the cliffs of the Azalkari city. The pale red sun sank low in the sky, casting long shadows across the jagged peaks that surrounded the city, giving everything a blood-tinged glow. Declan had grown accustomed to the strange beauty of this place. Its brutal, unforgiving atmosphere mirroring the harshness of the culture he was now a part of. Or, at least, he had thought he was. It had been weeks since the trial of the worthy, and though Declan had made strides in earning the respect of the Azalkari, the weight of Nira's challenge still lingered. He was no longer just an outsider. He was now bound to their world, their traditions, their unyielding customs. But even as he tried to adjust, a sense of unease gnawed at him. Something wasn't right. The tension in the air had shifted from one of cautious respect to something darker, more insidious. He could feel in the way the warriors looked at him now, less with admiration, more with suspicion. The women, the Varka, had been largely silent in the days following his victory, but their eyes followed him constantly, a mixture of gratitude and resentment dancing behind their gazes. It was Nira, though, who had grown distant. The fire in her eyes had dimmed, and though she continued to train with him, there was a coldness to her demeanor that sent shivers down his spine. He had spent years in combat, learning to read the smallest movements, the shifts in tone that signaled impending danger. But what made Nira's silence so much more unnerving was the depth of it. She wasn't just holding herself back. She was hiding something from him, something important. As Declan paced along the edge of the cliff, a low hum vibrated through the ground beneath his boots. It was the unmistakable sound of approaching ships, Azalkari vessels, sleek and deadly, cutting through the thin atmosphere. He turned to face them, his hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm holstered at his waist. But as the ships drew nearer, he knew something was off. There were more ships than usual, and their formation was wrong, too tight, too deliberate. "Captain Harper," a voice called from behind him. He didn't need to turn to know it was Vilan, the Azalkari emissary. The warrior's voice was as cold as the air around them, and when Declan turned to face him, he saw the subtle twitch of a smile on the Azalkari's lips. "The Patriarch has summoned you." Declan's stomach dropped. The Patriarch, the Azalkari leader whose word was law. Declan had hoped to avoid his attention, but it seemed he had failed in that regard. "Why the sudden meeting?" Declan asked, his voice guarded. He could feel the tension rising in his chest, the creeping suspicion that something wasn't right. "The Patriarch is curious about your progress, human," Vilan replied, his tone cryptic. "There are questions that need answering. The trial of the worthy was not meant to bring peace. It was meant to test your ability to survive. And now, your loyalty is being questioned." Declan felt his blood run cold. Loyalty to what? Villainous eyes flicked toward the ships as they hovered in the sky, their silhouettes dark against the fading sun. To the Azalkari, to the Varka, to the order of things. Before Declan could respond, a figure stepped out from behind the cliffs. It was Nira, but she wasn't alone. A shadow loomed beside her, a tall Azalkari warrior with a dark cloak draped over his broad shoulders. The figure's face was obscured, but Declan didn't need to see his eyes to feel the malice radiating from him. The tension between them was immediate, palpable. "What's going on, Nira?" Declan asked, his voice rising with a mixture of confusion and frustration. Nira didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, her posture rigid. "It's over, Captain," she said quietly, her voice laced with sorrowful finality. "You've been a pawn in this game from the beginning." Declan's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" The Azalkari warrior beside Nira stepped forward, pulling back his hood to reveal his face, a face Declan recognized instantly. It was Vlar, an Azalkari leader with close ties to the Patriarch. His reputation among the warriors was legendary, a man who had never been defeated in battle. "You've been used, human," Vlar said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "You were never meant to claim the Varka. You were never meant to be a hero. The Patriarch wanted this, wanted you to fall into our hands." Declan's blood ran cold. "A trap?" Nira finally turned to face him, her eyes dark with guilt. "I didn't want this to happen. I tried to warn you, but there's no escaping it now. The Patriarch has been watching you, watching all of us. He's made arrangements. You're the one who's been chosen to lead, but it's not in the way you think." Declan's mind raced. The world he had thought he understood, the honor, the traditions, the trial, had all been a facade. They had been watching him all along, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, Nira, the woman he had fought to protect, the one he had trusted, was part of the betrayal. "I didn't ask for this," Declan said, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. "This isn't what I signed up for." Nira's face softened, and for a brief moment, Declan saw the woman she truly was. Vulnerable, broken, trapped in a system that was larger than both of them. "I know, but it's too late, Declan. You've been branded as the Patriarch's pawn. And now they're coming for us." A distant roar broke through the stillness, the sound of engines powering up. Declan turned just in time to see the Azalkari ships descending toward them, their engines screaming like a thunderstorm tearing through the sky. "They're not coming to make peace," Nira whispered. "They're coming to claim what's theirs." The ground beneath Declan's feet seemed to shift as the reality of the betrayal sank in. He had been a pawn, but no more. He would no longer be the man caught in their game. With a cold fury rising within him, he turned to face the approaching ships, knowing that this battle wasn't over yet. Chapter 5, Redemption and Revolution. The sky above Erath 9 was a swirl of deep crimson as the ships descended, their sleek forms cutting through the thick atmosphere with unnerving precision. The sun had set, casting the world into shadow, but the flickering lights from the approaching vessels illuminated the land like a hellish inferno. Declan stood at the edge of the citadel, his boots planted firmly in the cracked soil, his heart pounding in his chest. The betrayal had cut deep. Nira's coldness, her painful admission, had left him shaken. But in that moment, when everything seemed lost, when the weight of Azalkari traditions and deceit hung heavily over him, Declan felt something inside of him snap into focus. This wasn't just about survival. It wasn't about following orders, or about being a pawn in someone else's game. This was about changing the game itself. He could hear the distant hum of the approaching ships, their engines roaring like thunder in the night sky. The Azalkari fleet was vast, dozens of ships hovering just above the cliffs. They were here to reclaim the Varka, to take back what they believed was rightfully theirs. Declan's jaw tightened, but not this time. Behind him, Nira stepped forward, her presence as commanding as ever, despite the doubt and guilt that clouded her eyes earlier. She had been silent for most of the day, but now there was a fire in her eyes, a fire that matched his own. She had been part of the betrayal, but she had also chosen a side, and that side was his. "We don't have much time," Nira said, her voice low but filled with determination. Her hand rested on the hilt of the sword strapped to her waist, the blade glowing faintly with an otherworldly energy. "They're coming to take us back, to take everything back, but we won't let them." Declan turned to face her, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. There was no going back now. The Azalkari had set this in motion, but it was his hands that would have to pull the strings from here on out. "Not this time," Declan agreed, his voice low and steady. "We'll make our stand here, but we need to act fast. We can't let them trap us inside the citadel. We need to take the fight to them." Nira nodded, a brief but fierce smile flashing across her face. The other Varka women had gathered behind her, their expressions a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. They had been trained for battle, but they had never fought like this. Not for themselves, not for their freedom. "You won't be alone," Nira said, her voice strong. "We may not be Azalkari warriors, but we are Varka, and we've been fighting for our freedom for longer than you can imagine. It's time we show the Azalkari that we're more than their property." The ground beneath them shook as another wave of Azalkari ships touched down, their massive forms blocking the horizon. Declan could see the familiar silhouettes of armored warriors stepping out of the ships, their weapons glinting in the dim light. There were too many of them, too much firepower to defeat head-on. But Declan wasn't thinking about defeat. Chapter 6, The Final Stand. The Citadel, once a towering symbol of Azalkari dominance, now lay in ruins. The ground shook with the force of battle, the air thick with the acrid scent of smoke and burning metal. The faint hum of the energy shields, now flickering and unstable, seemed to pulse in time with the growing heartbeat of the revolution. Declan stood at the edge of the battlefield, his boots sinking into the ash-covered earth, his breath heavy with adrenaline. The final confrontation was at hand. He glanced toward Nira, who stood by his side, her eyes locked on the horizon where the Patriarch's forces were rallying for one final push. The Varka women, once prisoners, now stood as warriors, each one armed and ready, their resolve etched into their faces. They had all fought side by side, but now, in this moment, everything came down to Declan and Nira. They were the leaders, the ones who would determine the fate of this battle. "This is it," Nira said, her voice low but steady. Her sword, glowing in ethereal blue light, was clutched firmly in her hand, the same weapon she had used to survive countless trials. "They'll come for us with everything they have. We have to break their lines before they can regroup." Declan nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle, the familiar weight of the weapon grounding him in the chaos of the moment. He had seen battles before, many of them, but nothing like this. This wasn't just about survival. This was about freedom. For Nira, for the Varka, for every soul that had ever been crushed beneath the Azalkari boot. He could hear the roar of the Azalkari war cry growing louder, the metallic clash of armor as the Azalkari warriors prepared for their final assault. The massive gates to the citadel had been breached, and now the Patriarch's forces were flooding in from every direction, a wall of armored bodies and devastating firepower. Declan could see them through the dust, their weapons gleaming in the dim light, their eyes full of the unwavering certainty of conquest. "We can't let them take us alive," Declan said, his voice a fierce growl. His eyes met Nira's, and for a brief moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. This wasn't just about defeating the Azalkari. It was about erasing the system that had kept the Varka trapped for centuries. "We won't," Nira replied, her voice soft but resolute. "But we won't do it alone." Declan turned to the women, who had gathered behind him, their faces a mix of fear and hope. They were ready, their weapons drawn, their bodies tense with anticipation. Despite everything they had been through, despite the centuries of oppression, they were standing here, fighting for their freedom, fighting for a chance to live on their own terms. The hum of the Raven's call filled the bridge as the starship soared to the silent expanse of space. Declan Harper stood at the viewport, his fingers lightly grazing the edge of the cold glass. Outside, the stars stretched like pinpricks of light in an endless void, their silent glow reflecting the deep peace that had settled over him. He glanced at the glowing nebulae in the distance, their swirling colors a backdrop to a quiet, triumphant moment. Behind him, Nira stepped forward, her presence steady and unwavering. She stood beside him, not as a prisoner of tradition, but as an equal, an ally, a partner. Together, they had broken the chains of the Azalkari, reshaped the future for the Varka, and torn down the walls that had confined them all. "You did it," Nira whispered, her voice a gentle hum in the stillness. Her eyes shone with something more than victory. There was peace, finally, in the way she looked at him. Declan's gaze shifted to her, the weight of the past few weeks settling in his chest. "We did it," he corrected softly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." She smiled, the light from distant stars glinting off the edge of her sword. "You didn't need to fight alone," she said, her voice stronger now, more certain. "Neither of us did." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the constellations pulse like the heartbeat of the galaxy. The battles, the betrayals, the choices that defined them, they were behind them now. Declan's hand found hers, the touch gentle but firm. "It's not just about surviving anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's about building something worth fighting for.